So how do we speak to the universe? And even a better question, how do I hear from the universe after I speak to the universe? So here are going to be the three things that we are going to make sure that we are doing to make sure that we are speaking to the universe and hearing from the universe. And more importantly, we're going to keep this simple. It is not difficult. We're going to keep it really, really, really simple. The verse that started out, I started out with showing a verse that says, I came that you may have life and that you may have it in abundance. So the first thing is whenever we are speaking to the universe, understand his desire for us. So his desire is that we have an abundance in everything, whether it's health, wealth, or relationship. So the three things. The first thing that we're going to do when we are understanding how to speak to the universe is first understand that everything in life is about co-creating. Everything in life is about co-creating. The best way for me to explain co-creating would be for me to explain an example of not co-creating. So not co-creating is you making a decision and then letting someone else know the role that they're going to play in the decision that you made. So let's say, for example, somebody is, let's say somebody, which is crazy because even a 2-year-old wants to be co-created with. If you have a 2-year-old and you're like, hey, little Johnny, at 9 o'clock, you're going to sleep. Little Johnny can be head nodding and sleepy, but you telling him that he's going to go to sleep at 9 o'clock, like little Johnny doesn't want to do that. So I believe a lot of times in life, the main issue with any relationship is a lack of co-creating. What does that have to do with hearing from God? If you can understand how to co-create in this 3D realm, if you can understand how to co-create on earth with the human, then you'll understand how to co-create in the 4D or in your imagination or in your spiritual relationship with God. Why? Because your 3D is a mirror of your 4D. If you're having issues hearing from God, you're having issues in the 3D co-creating or effectively communicating with people. So back to an example of not co-creating. So not co-creating is me making a decision and saying, hey, I made this decision and this is the role that you're going to play in this decision. So for example, I made the decision to cheat, and your role in the decision that I've made in cheating is for you to be home, be an amazing wife or be an amazing girlfriend and not know about the fact that I did XYZ, right? So I made this decision and then I gave you your role. And nobody likes that. Matter of fact, I believe the gift that God gives us is if there's anybody that doesn't have to co-create. God could easily just be like, you know what? You're manifesting something. This is the way that it's going to be. You're living life. This is the way that it's going to be. I've made a decision, and this is the role that you're going to play in this decision. But God doesn't do that. What he does is he co-creates with us. So the first way to make sure that we are able to hear from God is understanding how we co-create with God. So co-creation is number one. Number two, now that we know that we need to co-create with God, we need to understand how we're doing that. And the best way to understand that is understand the dimensions that we're in. In this dimension, this is the 3D dimension. When you and I are co-creating, meaning we're making a decision or you want to hear from me or we are effectively communicating, in this dimension, we're going to do that. Matter of fact, we're doing that kind of right now. So I'm talking to you and you're looking at this video and we are co-creating. We are effectively communicating right now. If I was in front of you and you and I are having a conversation, there's a time that you're talking and I'm listening. And then there's a time that I'm listening and you're talking. And as long as there is that healthy balance, when you are talking, I am present and listening. And then when I'm talking, you're present and listening. We are effectively communicating. If I'm speaking and you're thinking about what to say while I am speaking, then we're not effectively communicating because you're not listening at that time. You're hearing me, but you're not listening to me. And it's the same exact way whenever we're manifesting or whenever we are hearing from God and on our journey on while we're actually manifesting. When you are present, you are able to hear from God. If you're not present and you are doing anything else, then you're not able to hear from God. So in this 3D dimension that we're in right now, this is where we as humans effectively communicate. It would not make sense for me to speak to God or try to hear from God with the same faculties, the same faculties that I'm using to hear or speak to you. So what that means is this. I'm using my 3D mouth right now as I'm talking to you. Whenever I talk to God, I'm not using this 3D mouth. I'm speaking from the inside. So the first thing that I'm doing when I'm talking to God is I'm speaking from the inside. Now, does God hear everything? Absolutely. But there's this verse in the Bible where Jesus is speaking and he's about to pray and he's about to pray for the multitude. And he has a conversation with God and he says, hey, I'm speaking out loud just for the multitude, for the people that are listening. But you and I don't normally use these faculties to speak. We normally use feelings. So whenever you're speaking from God, use your 5 senses that are on the inside and talk to God on the inside. When you hear from God, all you're doing is leaving this 3D dimension and going into the 4D. Your 4D is the dimension of solutions. Your 4D is the dimension of your imagination. If there's something that you want and you know specifically what it is that you want, then whenever you speak to God, you're going to do that in the 4D. And at that particular time, you are using your subconscious mind, you're using your imagination, you are using your Christ conscious. You are co-creating with Christ and you are effectively communicating. The way that you are doing that is you're going to the end. You're going to the end of the thing that you want. And you're imagining the thing that you want as if you already have it. And then in response, what God is giving you or what Christ is giving you is the steps on how you're going to actually get there. So if you look at it this way, how do I effectively communicate with an Uber, or how do I hear from an Uber? All I got to do is give them the address. My job is just to give them the address. His job is to get me there. It is not my job to tell him which way to go. It is not my job to tell him the best route. It is just my job to make sure that he understands the address that I am going to. It's the same exact way when you are hearing from God. Your job is just to go to the end result. Just go to the place. Go to the identity of you having $100,000. Go to the identity of you having $1 million. Go to that identity. It is his job then to give you the path of least resistance to do that thing. Now, here's the third part. The path of least resistance is always going to come as an experience. It's always going to come as an experience. So let's say, for example, I want you to start asking yourself this question, and this is step number 3. I want you to ask yourself this question. What would it look like? This is how you're going to talk to God. What would it look like for me to have, and then what is that thing that you have an issue with? What would it look like for me to have $50,000 in 30 days? Or what would it look like for me to feel like I have $50,000 in 30 days? What would it look like for me to have? That is the question, and that is the way that you speak to your subconscious mind. Now, after you answer that question, God, in all of his amazingness, is going to make sure that he answers that question with something practical. Can he give you words? Like words? Yes, he can. But normally, whenever you ask that question, what would it look like if, right? What would it look like for me to have an amazing lunch? What I want you to do, and you can do that right now, I want you to pay attention to what happens after you ask that question. As soon as you ask that question, your conscious mind is going to try to give you an answer. So what would it look like for me to have an amazing lunch? And then your conscious mind will start giving you, oh, you could go here, you can go here, you can go here. All your conscious mind is doing is going into your brain, and it is pulling out ideas and things that are already in that file cabinet in your brain. And what's crazy is that sometimes people think that's God. What would it look like for me to have an amazing lunch? And then your conscious mind brings up Chipotle. And then he's like, oh my goodness, I'm supposed to go to Chipotle. No, that's your conscious mind. That is not your subconscious mind, and it is definitely not your superconscious mind. So what God does is he says, listen, let me make it really simple for you so you'll know that it's me. What you're going to do is you're going to ask this question, what would it look like? And then what you're going to do is you're going to leave it alone and you're just going to wait for the response. So you're just going to wait for God to give you the response. The response is always going to come as an experience. So something, for example, I know I could ask that question, what would it look like for me to have an amazing clothes, whenever I am selling someone, and then I just leave it alone. And then I might be scrolling on TikTok, and lo and behold, like the video that comes on TikTok is one that's not in my file cabinet. It's not in my file cabinet, and so it's not in my brain, and it is the most amazing answer. And then when you implement it, it's like, boom, this is it. It works absolutely perfect. What would it look like for me to have an amazing relationship with the person of my dreams? Sometimes you might be thinking, oh, that means that the person is going to come into my life. It could be whenever you say, what would it look like for me to have the most amazing person of my dreams? It could be God leading you to somebody that is a relationship expert. And there's some things that you actually clear out in your identity that then prepares you for the person of your dreams. But it is always going to be something practical. It is always going to be something. Somebody might call you, and just in the conversation, this person is talking, and you're getting the answer. You might be driving down the street, and you might see a billboard, but you can ask that question: what would it look like if? And then leave it alone, and then just wait for the answer to flow through. So let's do a recap. Step number one, everything is about co-creating with Christ. The way that you're going to co-create with Christ or your subconscious mind, for those of you that are on the theological end, is going on the scientific end. It's your subconscious mind. On the theological end, it is your Christ conscious. So number one, you are going to go into your imagination and you're going to imagine the thing that you want as if you already have it. Number two is just simply understanding the dimensions. Because God uses the things in the 3D dimension, whenever I am hearing from God, I'm going to speak to him in a different dimension. I'm going to speak to him in the 4D. I'm going to speak to him using my imagination. I'm going to imagine the thing that I want as if I already have it, and then I'm going to leave it alone. And then once I leave it alone, which is equivalent to you putting the address in the Uber and just letting him take you there, you're not getting in the front seat and trying to drive. You're not looking around and wondering, are you going in the right direction? All you're doing is giving him that address and letting him go. And then the third thing that you're asking is, what would it look like? What would it look like for me to have, and then fill in the blank? What would it look like for me to have, fill in the blank, and then wait for the practical answer? And that's going to be the best and fastest way for you to hear from God.